Hey there guys, it's Dr. Katie Ailes from I'm Loud Productions, and in today's video I'm going to teach you how to write a univocal poem. This is a style of poetry with one big rule. You're only allowed to use one vowel in the entire poem. First thing, this writing is slightly tricky. Is an example of a univocal sentence using the vowel I. Your challenge in this workshop is to write an entire poem like that. It's challenging, but it's also really fun and rewarding. In this workshop, I'm going to explain exactly what a univocal poem is, give you some examples, and lead you through how to write one yourself. Just like the rest of our Return to Form workshops, there are two different ways that you can watch this video. The first one is to write your poem along with the workshop. You'll see that there are a bunch of screens with steps on them. Whenever you get to one of those screens, just hit pause, do whatever is in the step, and then hit play when you're ready to resume the workshop. That way you can write along, but at your own pace. The other way of doing it is that you can watch this video all the way through, and then that way you get a good understanding of the form, but you're not doing the steps. And then later, when you have time, you can actually try writing a univocal poem yourself. All you need for this workshop is something to write with and something to write on. So you could use a pen and paper like I'm going to show you in my examples, or you could use a computer, a tablet, even your phone, whatever floats your boat. This workshop and our entire Return to Form series is supported by the National Lottery through Creative Scotland. To see all of the videos in this series, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to like and share this video if you enjoyed it. Okay, here we go. Univocal writing has been around for as long as writers have played with language, but this particular form of poetry was popularized in the 1960s by a group of French writers who called themselves the Oulipo movement. This literary movement embraced a lot of forms of constrained writing, so forms of poetry and prose with a lot of rules, in order to get writers to break out of their comfort zones, try something new, and innovate in new styles. I won't go on too much about the history and context of this form, but technically a univocal poem, or univocalism as they're sometimes known, is a kind of lipogram. A lipogram is a form of constrained writing in which you omit a single letter or a group of letters. For example, in our Return to Form video featuring univocal poetry, we asked the poets Courtney Stoddart and Joe Gilbert to write univocal poems in E, which meant that they could only use the letter E. No A, I, O, or U allowed. You can watch that video up here. So this is obviously a highly constricted, pretty tricky way of writing. Why is it worth trying out? The great thing about writing in poetic form is that you're prompted by the restrictions to get out of your comfort zone and try something new, to really innovate and get creative with language and structure. And writing in form doesn't mean that all of your poems now have to use that form. It's just a great way of trying out something different, and that can be particularly helpful if you're experiencing writer's block or you just want to try something different with your creativity. Even if you're not particularly fussed about writing and publishing or performing a polished univocal poem, I'd highly encourage you to take this workshop and try writing one anyway. This is a really good form for becoming conscious of the words that you usually use and trying to use other things to really stretch your creativity and your vocabulary. So it's great not just for the purposes of writing a poem, but for your writing practice more broadly. All right, now that we've laid out what this form is, it's time to start writing one. And this might seem obvious, but the first step in writing a univocal poem is choosing what vowel you're going to be using throughout the poem. Because this is the only rule of a univocal poem, it's the most fundamental step. So how do you choose your vowel? You might be wondering if any vowels are easier or harder than others. Well, each one comes with its own challenges and privileges. For instance, there are certain commonly used words that you can only access in your poem if you're using a certain vowel. Let me show you what I mean. If you choose E as your vowel, you get access to a lot of pronouns, so you can use we, he, she. You also get some prepositions like here and there. You also get the, which is quite helpful. And interestingly, you can also use the past tense because you can use the suffix ed. For example, you can use the past tense words stretched and drenched and trembled if E is your vowel. However, if I is your vowel, you generally can't use the past tense. For example, you can use the word fix, but not the past tense fixed, because using the past tense involves an E. So if you want to write about the past tense, it could be helpful or even essential to use E as your vowel for your univocal poem. You also get access to many plural words with E. To use the same example, in a univocal poem in I, you couldn't use the plural of fix because it's fixes, which requires an E. E doesn't get all the glory, though. Other vowels have other benefits. With I, you get to use words including is, it, in, his, him, and with. You also get the suffix ing, allowing you to use thinking, bringing, etc. With a, you get to use, well, a. You also get and, at, all, that. With o, you get to use or, of, not, on, for, do, and the prefix non. With u, you get to use words including us, up, and the prefix un. And this is not an exhaustive list. There are a lot of other helpful connecting words that you can only use if you're using a certain vowel. And of course, it's not like you can only use these connecting words that I've shown in a univocal poem. This is just to illustrate some of the connecting words that you can only access if you're using a certain vowel. Writing univocal poetry presents a special question. Do you consider Y to be a vowel? I was taught in primary school that the vowels are A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y, which leaves the question pretty hazy. Ultimately, it's up to you whether you consider Y to be a vowel, in which case you can't use it in your univocal poem if you're using a different vowel, or if you consider it to be a consonant, in which case it's fair game. In their univocal poems, Joe Gilbert and Courtney Stoddart consider Y to be a consonant, which meant that they could use words like every and yell. In this workshop, I'm also going to say it's okay. In writing your poem, it's up to you what decision you make. Okay, so with all that context, thinking through all those ideas, it's now time to choose the vowel that you want to work with. If you have an idea already in mind, think about the words that you're going to need access to. For example, if you want to write in past tense, you might want to write in E, since E gives you access to ed. Does the subject of your poem require a certain vowel? Like, if it's an ode to the state of Alabama and you want to say Alabama in it, you're going to need A. We've come to the first step, so if you're writing along with this workshop, in the next screen, pause it and take some time deciding on your vowel. Now that you've chosen your vowel, the fun begins. Throughout this workshop, I'm going to be writing my example poem using the letter E. The next step to writing a univocal poem is to start building a word bank. This gives you your vocabulary for the poem and gets you accustomed to thinking in terms of that vowel and understanding what words you're able to use. So here, I'm going to start a section in my notebook for my word bank, ensuring I have plenty of space. If you're writing on a computer, I'd suggest using a separate document for this from the one where you're going to be drafting your poem. My vowel is E, so I'm going to write down as many univocal E words as I can possibly think of. When I come across prefixes and suffixes like est, ed, and I'm going to circle them because those are things that I can add on to other words, like building blocks. If you make a mistake, that is totally fine. Just cross out the word so that you don't accidentally use it in your poem. And you can group these words by similar kinds of words if you want, or just write them down randomly. Do whatever works best for you. So for this next step, start a new section of your notebook or a new document on your computer and write down as many words that only use your vowel as you can possibly think of. Okay, so now that you've started your word bank, I'm going to give you a tip to help you expand it. You can use the internet to help you find more words. Yes, some people might consider this cheating, in which case, feel free to skip this step, but I just call it using the resources available to write the best poem that you possibly can. There are several dictionary-style websites with advanced search options that allow you to search for univocal words, and I've linked to them in the video description just below. For example, I'm going to quickly show you here using the site WordSolver. This is a free website with some ads that provides lists of univocal words in all vowels. So on the main page, I'm going to scroll down and click Word Lists. In the top search bar, you want to select one vowel. In the bottom left search bar, select US English or just English. The bottom right search bar lets you select how many letters long you want the word to be. So if you just leave it on the highest setting, it'll show you words of all lengths, beginning with the longer words. As you scroll down, just keep clicking Get More Words to load more. And as you can see, this site also considers Y to be a consonant. There are words with Y in these lists. Now, because this site shows you univocal words with all of the vowels, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So to help you winnow it down, you can use the Find function in your web browser to search your specific vowel. So here I've searched E, and now it's highlighted all of the E's, so it's easier to see all of the words that use E, all of the words that I can use in my poem. As you find more words, or think of more words, add any that you think you might be interested in using to your word bank. So here I'm adding in ensemble, I've got kneel, treble, swelter, pedal. And it's okay too to include words that you probably won't end up using. Cheese, not sure I'm going to use that, but I put it in there anyway just to give myself the option later. Okay, go off and find more words. So now you have your word bank that you can start to use to build your univocal poem. And you're not limited to these words. As you're writing, you'll realize a lot more words using that vowel that you can always go back and add into your word bank to use later. All right, it's time to start developing our poem. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to start a new page separate from your word bank to start drafting phrases. I want you to think of the process of writing a univocal poem like building with Legos. You can only use one vowel, like one color of Legos. Let's say E is the red Legos. You've already done all the work of gathering a bunch of red Legos together, building this word bank full of words with the letter E in them. The next step is to start building by adding the Lego bricks together. So drafting univocal phrases out of the words that you've already gathered. So for this next step, in a moment, I want you to start a new page for your phrase bank, which is sort of like the more developed form of your word bank. And I want you to take some time going through your word bank and see if any of the words join together nicely. So at the start of mine, I've noticed the phrases we slept and we crept. So I've just added these into my phrase bank here. This is a bit like panning for gold from our last workshop, except it's more like adding things together than winnowing them down. You might write down variations of different phrases. So I have we went there, and then I wrote down where we went. Another technique that you might want to try here is saying the words in your word bank aloud repeatedly to see if any phrases roll off your tongue when you do that. It's amazing what muscle memory can do, the things that your body remembers that are activated when you speak out loud. For example, when I was drafting my phrases, I kept saying the word we, and came up with a lot of phrases like we the exempt, we the tempted, and more direct phrases like we left, we aired. And don't worry at this point if your phrases make sense, if they're silly. I've got secret cheese in there, We're not writing the poem just yet. Things don't need to be in any sort of order. All that we're doing is joining up our Lego bricks so that we're starting very slowly to develop our vocabulary that we might use in this poem. Okay, your turn. Go ahead and start setting up your phrase bank. All right, you've got your word bank, you've got your phrase bank. Let's just keep building. The great thing about univocal poetry is, again, there's only that one rule to use just one vowel. So your poem can literally be about anything that you want. There's no restrictions on content. As you were joining up those words to make phrases, maybe you noticed some patterns emerging. Maybe there's a narrative or some other seed of a poem that might be starting to sprout. Maybe there's a phrase that you're starting to latch onto, something that you think you might be able to repeat and use as the central refrain throughout the poem. For example, in her univocal poem, These Secrets, Courtney Stoddart repeats the word secrets again and again to sort of examine different facets of that concept. Or maybe there's a narrative beginning to form in your drafting that you can start to expand. This is the strategy that Jo Gilbert used in her poem Set the Scene. Jo told me that she had a bit of a creative breakthrough with her poem when she came up with the band names that she could use: Led Zepp, The Verve, My Chem. From that point, she began thinking about the experience of going out to live music gigs. Then the narrative of the poem started to emerge for her. There are so many directions that you could go with your univocal poem. It could be a rhythmic poem with a refrain like Courtney's, or a narrative, a story like Jo's. It could be a description of a scene or a sort of a song. It can really be whatever works best for you. In a moment, for this next step, I'm going to ask you to go through your phrase bank and see if anything jumps out at you. See if there's anything that you think you might be able to expand and continue working with to build your univocal poem. Then I'm going to ask you to start a new page and start working through these ideas. So in my phrase bank, I've noticed that I have a lot of sentences that begin with she and have actions in them. And I think I want to start developing that, so using a narrative with a female character. I'm going to highlight all of the relevant phrases, and then on a new page, I'm going to copy them over. Once they're copied, I'm going to start expanding them, so adding words, adding details, adding new phrases. So for example, I had, she lent me her dress. And I could add a little bit more detail there. So I'm going to go back to my word bank, and I found the word velvet. And I like that. She lent me her velvet dress. And why not add some red heels, just for kicks? Okay, your turn. So go through your phrase bank, and anything that jumps out at you, anything that you think you could develop through your univocal poem, highlight it and then copy it over onto a new page. Then from there, start expanding. The great thing about writing univocal poetry is that because there's only one rule, there aren't a lot of complicated steps to using and understanding the form, like, for example, there are when writing a sonnet. You can watch my workshop on that up there. It does have a few more steps. So for the rest of this workshop, rather than giving you a lot more detailed steps with particular assignments, I'm going to give you a lot of advice that I'll then give you opportunities to implement when continuing to draft your poem. So one piece of guidance is to try to incorporate longer words into your univocal poem. One thing that I've particularly noticed as I draft univocal poetry is that I get really fixated on the tiny words, and I just try to use them to build sentences, like phrases like, we met them there, she kept me. So those are fine. They're perfectly legitimate phrases for a univocal poem, but it does make your poem pretty stilted and monosyllabic. So try to incorporate some longer words into your poem if at all possible. Quick and easy step on this, so take a little bit of time, go back to your word bank, find some longer words, and then try to incorporate them into your drafting to break things up and make your sentences more interesting. My second piece of guidance goes back to something that I said in my sonnet workshop, which is that there's a tendency when writing in form to get really caught up on the technicalities and forget that ultimately you're writing a poem. So try to bring in some poetic devices if at all possible, like metaphor and simile, things like that. There are some poetic devices which happily are kind of inevitable when you write univocal poetry. For example, assonance, which is when you use a lot of words that sound the same. That's kind of going to happen naturally in a univocal poem since you're only using one vowel. For example, here's a clip of Courtney's poem where you can really hear the assonance.
These secrets felt they held, self-ensembles well, remember secrets never tell, these secrets speechless yet they sell.
So in a moment, I'm going to give you another opportunity to keep developing your univocal poem and specifically to try adding in some of these poetic devices. So let's focus on metaphor and simile. Metaphor being when you say that one thing is another thing, and simile being when you compare one thing to another thing. These devices really enrich a poem, so try using them here. Remember that if you ever get stuck, you can always go back to your word bank and to your phrase bank and use some of those elements to bring them into your drafting. On the other hand, remember that you don't have to use every word and phrase that you came up with. I was super proud of my phrase, Helen kept the secret cheeses, but I'm not sure that I'm going to end up using it. Sometimes it's better to kill your darlings. Another helpful thing to keep in mind is that poetry doesn't always need to be written in perfect, complete, grammatically correct sentences. And this is particularly helpful when writing univocal poetry because, as I was saying at the beginning, when you pick your vowel, that means that you don't have access to all of the little joining words that other vowels would allow you to use. For instance, Courtney Stoddart's poem, These Secrets, uses fleeting images and relatively short lines and little punctuation, but it still makes sense. It's still readable. So that's the most important thing to keep in mind. As long as your poem is clear and can be understood, that's the important thing. Now, my next point might seem counterintuitive to say on a workshop about poetic form, but I think it's necessary. Rules are there to be broken. Only use the form so long as it serves you and your poem. Everything that I've told you so far will guide you towards writing a perfect, correct univocal poem. And that is awesome if that's what you're here for. Ignore everything that I'm about to say. But I'm not about to tell you how to do a bad job. I'm about to tell you some things that might help you innovate within the form and stretch the form. So maybe keep listening. I've got 3 tips to help you innovate within univocal poetry, and after each tip, I'm going to give you a chance to incorporate that information into how you write. Try it out, see if it works. If not, just move on to the next tip. All right, tip 1. The only rule of a univocal poem is that you can't use the 4 vowels that you've excluded. That means that it is totally okay to use words that have no vowels. For example, if we're saying that Y is a consonant, then rhythm is a word with no vowels, so you can include it. The same is true for abbreviations like TV. This is a strategy that Jo Gilbert uses masterfully in her poem Set the Scene. So she has phrases including gents v femmes and fresh zesty. So she can't use the words versus and, but by just using their abbreviations, we still know what she means, and she hasn't broken the rules. In the same vein, you can use contractions. So for example, in my univocal poem in E, I can't use the phrase we were not, but I can use the phrase we weren't. I can't use the phrase we would, but I can use the phrase we'd. The same thing goes with symbols. So for example, I couldn't say the phrase she and me equal we, but I can write down she plus symbol me equals symbol we. I can also do the same thing using question marks, exclamation points, and other punctuation to help get across the idea without breaking any rules. A final note on this tip, univocal poems are great places to play with sounds that might not technically be words, but as long as they don't use the other vowels, that's totally fine. Again, Jo Gilbert's poem Set the Scene does this really effectively, including in this section describing partying, and I'll let her perform it.
Flex, step, flex, feet veer left, melded by tech sets, reverb, let's see our steel wheels, DJ.
I just love the energy that Jo brings to that. It's brilliant. All right, so let's take a moment to pause here and continue developing your univocal poem with this advice in mind. Are there any ways that you can incorporate non-words, abbreviations, contractions, and sounds into your univocal poem to make it more interesting and easier to understand? Take a moment, go through your word bank, go through your phrase bank, and try it out. Okay, time for the second tip. As I was saying earlier, rules exist to be broken, and poetic forms only exist to serve our creativity. If, as you're drafting your univocal poem, you think that it might serve your poem best to, in a specific way, break univocal, then that might be something worth exploring. Let me show you what I mean. For example, as I was drafting univocal poetry in E for this workshop, I came up with the idea to do a sort of a duo vocal poem with 2 characters, called his plus hers. Everything that's his would be univocal in I, and everything that's hers would be univocal in E. Then, at the end, the characters get together, and there's a section about what's theirs. Obviously, the term theirs uses both E and I. And in this concluding section, both E and I can be used in the words. This sort of symbolizes how the characters have joined and is a way of the poetic form reflecting the content of the poem. Right now, this is just a scrap of an idea. I haven't yet expanded it into a full poem, but I'm sharing it here as an example of how you can thoughtfully, creatively break the rules of univocal poetry in order to innovate and expand the genre. So note here, I'm not telling you just to break univocal randomly. That'll probably just look like you haven't edited your poem very well. But if you think that there's an intentional, thoughtful way to go about it that would serve your poem, go ahead and explore that possibility. I'm going to give you a moment now to go through your material, think a little bit about your concept, and consider whether this might be a strategy that could work best for your poem. If so, that's great. Start jotting down ideas and testing them out. If not, that is totally fine. Carry on to the next tip. All right, final tip. Inevitably, as you're drafting your univocal poem, you'll come up with a phrase that you absolutely love, but you're not allowed to use it because it has another vowel in it. For example, when I was drafting, I came up with the phrase, "she needed to keep dreaming," which I love, and initially I thought was okay because it still has the E sound, but obviously there's an A in dreaming, so can't use that. But my advice, don't throw those phrases away. You have two options here. Either you could think about whether you could bend the rules, like I just described in my last tip, to include that phrase, or what we're going to do in a moment is we're going to start a bank for scraps that you can revisit in creating other poems. Throughout this workshop series and throughout all of your creative writing, I want you to remember that everything that you create is valid, is legitimate, is creative, and even if it doesn't fit perfectly in this poem, might be the perfect piece for another poem that you're working on. So don't throw it away. The final step in this workshop is I want you to start a new page, title it Scraps Bank or something like that, and just have it handy for any phrases that you come up with that you think might be interesting, but you just can't use right now. All right, that's all my wisdom given. At this point, we've gone through all of the steps essential to writing a univocal poem. You've got your word bank, you've got your phrase bank, you've got some lines drafted, you've worked on expanding them and including poetic devices, and I've even told you how to break the form a little bit if you're interested in innovating. Now that we've gone through all of that, continuing developing and editing your univocal poem is a lot like working with any other poem. You're going to try out different ideas, make mistakes, cut things out, redraft things, keep playing around with it until you have something that you're happy with. This might take a little while, so just be patient with yourself and give yourself plenty of time to work. When you're editing, a special hint is that if you're editing on a computer, you can use the search function in your document to search all of the other vowels just to triple check that you haven't let any other vowels sneak in there by accident. If you fancy sharing your univocal poetry, I would love to read it. Just drop what you've got in the comments. And as well, if you've got any questions about writing in this form, please drop them there as well, and I will answer them. If you enjoyed this workshop, please like the video and subscribe to our channel to get all of our videos as they come out. And please share this video with a friend. Maybe challenge a pal to a univocal off. You can take the rest of the workshops in our Return to Form series at this playlist, and you can watch all of the poems created in this project at this playlist. Thank you so much, guys, and happy writing!